My name is Rachel Cole, and the day my family tried to joke me out of a waterfront auction was the day I finally stopped being the invisible daughter. The salt air off the Carolina coast hit me as soon as I stepped out of the borrowed sedan, cool and sharp, tugging at my navy cardigan and whipping my hair across my face. I must have looked wildly out of place among the men in tailored linen and women in designer resort wear stepping out of black cars and glossy SUVs. Lowcountry auctions were not casual affairs. They were quiet battlegrounds where old money and new money measured each other without ever raising their voices. I walked across the brick courtyard of the Charleston Harbor Club, carrying nothing but my worn leather tote and an even older pair of flats that had survived more than one overnight shift. No diamonds, no stylist, no entourage, just me, my breath, and a calm I had spent a decade earning. I had almost reached the front steps when I heard her voice slice through the chatter like a butter knife scraping china. "Oh, look," my sister drawled, just loud enough to carry. "Rachel found the wrong side of town. This is not the food bank, sweetheart." Madeline always did have a gift for performance. Even from a few yards away, I could see the way she tilted her head, just so, auburn hair falling perfectly over one shoulder. Her coral dress hugging all the angles our mother liked to brag about. She spoke to the group gathered around her, but her eyes were pinned on me with bright, delighted cruelty. Conversations softened, heads turned. A few people smiled in that awkward way strangers do when they do not know whether to laugh or not, until my father's chuckle broke the hesitation. "She probably thinks they are auctioning off coupons," he said, as if he were delivering a punchline he had been rehearsing all morning. My mother pressed her manicured hand to her pearl necklace like she might faint from the hilarity. "Bless her heart." She sighed. She must have seen a state auction and thought it meant a yard sale. Once upon a time, those words would have burned straight through my skin. I would have flushed, bright red, mumbled something apologetic, wished I could evaporate into the brick under my feet. That girl, the one who took their mockery, like gospel, had died a long time ago. I did not flinch. I did not answer. I did not even give them the gift of my eyes. The only sound I let matter was the click of the glass doors as I walked into the lobby. Inside, the air smelled like polished wood and citrus cleaner. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the harbor where sailboats bobbed gently on the water. At the registration desk, staff in black blazers were checking credentials and handing out sleek navy paddles embossed with silver numbers. Two men behind me discussed hedge funds. A woman near the window whispered about zoning restrictions on historic properties. The woman at the registration table offered me a professional, pleasant smile. "Welcome to the Harbor Club. Name?" she asked, fingers poised over the keyboard. "Rachel Cole," I said. Her hands paused for a heartbeat. Her eyes flicked from the screen to me, reassessing. Something shifted in her expression. Not shock exactly, more like recognition, respect, caution. Maybe all three. "Of course," she said softly. Her fingers moved quickly now. "You are cleared for the full private bidding range. Here you are, Ms. Cole." She slid the paddle across the smooth surface toward me. The wood felt heavier than it looked. Solid, real, final. The full range. Behind me, I heard Madeline's laughter snap off mid-cackle like someone had hit a mute button. The air thickened with silence. There was a rustle of clothing as people turned as they tried to reconcile the woman in thrift store flats with the words, "full private bidding range." They had not known. My parents had laughed because they were certain they understood my value. They had no idea who I had become while they were busy polishing Madeline's image. They had no idea what I had built. They had no idea what was about to happen. I curled my fingers around the paddle, feeling its weight settle into my palm like truth. Have you ever walked into a room where everyone decided you were worthless before you even opened your mouth? If you have, you know exactly how quiet rage can feel like fuel. You also know why I want you to really hear what I'm about to say. Because less than an hour after they tried to laugh me out of that auction, I would hold up that paddle and buy the coastal estate my family had arrived believing belonged to my sister by divine right. The property that was supposed to cement Madeline's lifestyle brand and my parents' social resurrection would become the headquarters of the foundation I built from the very life they dismissed as a failure. I was never the pathetic daughter they told everyone about over cocktails. Not then, not now, not ever again. But if you really want to understand why standing in that harbor side auction felt like stepping over a line I could never go back from, you have to know where I started. You have to know what kind of family treats one daughter like a crown jewel and the other like a smudge on the glass. And you have to know what finally made me walk away. I grew up in a cul-de-sac outside Savannah in one of those beige subdivisions where every house looks like a copy of the last. We were not rich. We were not poor. We were comfortable enough that my parents could obsess over image without ever worrying about actual survival. In that carefully curated life, there were two daughters. Madeline was the picture for the holiday cards, the aftershot in every story my mother told. The girl people pointed to and said, "She is going places." She had the kind of beauty that photographs loved, just like my mother always bragged. Honey brown eyes, endless legs, the kind of smile that made adults lean in and children want to follow her around. She sparkled in school plays, cheerleading, church choir. If there was a spotlight, she found it. If there was a compliment, she caught it. And then there was me. I was the girl who would rather sit on the floor of the garage with a secondhand laptop tinkering with old code and broken hardware than pose for family photos. I liked taking things apart and putting them back together. I loved the way lines of code could make something appear out of nowhere. I loved patterns and logic and the strange comfort of a problem that eventually yielded to persistence. To my parents, that was not talent, it was an embarrassment. "Rachel just plays with those nerd toys," my mother would say with a theatrical sigh, smoothing Madeline's hair for yet another photo. "It ruins the family picture when she drags that old computer around." "That stuff does not lead to real success," my father would add casually, like he was discussing the weather. "Engineering is a man's world, and even then, only a handful of geniuses make any money." He would glance at me then just long enough to drive the point home. "She is not that kind of genius." It did not matter that I got top scores in math and science. It did not matter that my teachers sent home notes calling me promising and advanced. Promise was only valuable to my parents if it could be photographed in a homecoming sash or a glossy recital program. So they poured everything into Madeline private dance lessons, expensive pageants, summer programs where girls learned to network and brand themselves. She got a car on her 16th birthday, because as my father put it, a young lady of her caliber needs to arrive in style. I got rides when it was convenient. And responsibility. So much responsibility. Help your sister with her outfit. Run back to the house. "Rachel, you forgot your sister's music. Take the photo, Rachel. Make sure you get her good side." It is amazing how quickly a child can learn what love is supposed to look like when it is always directed at someone else. By the time I was a teenager, the script was set. At dinner, Madeline got chosen for another feature in the school magazine. At church, "Madeline has so much potential. We are so blessed." At family gatherings, "We are still trying to figure out what Rachel's good at, but Madeline, always Madeline." The first real crack in the story came my senior year of high school. We sat around the kitchen table, the air heavy with the smell of pot roast and the faint tang of my father's aftershave. Acceptance letters were spread in front of us like a deck of cards that had already been stacked. Madeline announced. First, of course, she had been accepted to a private liberal arts college in North Carolina that my parents had practically worshipped during campus tours. There were brochures with photos of brick buildings and autumn leaves spread out like trophies. My mother cried, pressing a napkin to her mouth. "My baby," she whispered. "I knew they would see what you are worth." When the noise settled, I cleared my throat. "I got into a computer engineering program," I said, "in Texas. They offered me a partial scholarship." I waited. For excitement, for pride, for something. My father leaned back, folding his arms. "That is nice," he said slowly. "But we have been very clear. We can only afford to pay for one tuition in full." I stared at him. "I know, I just thought maybe with the scholarship you could help cover the rest. I can work, I can take loans, I just..." He shook his head before I could finish. "We are paying for Madeline's college," he said. "She is the one with real potential. Those tech programs are risky. You have always been better with people than with pressure." My mother did not even bother looking up from Madeline's brochure when she added her part. "Besides, those degrees are not very feminine. All those nights staring at a screen, that is not a life." Something inside me went very still, I heard myself say. "So you are not going to help me at all?" My father shrugged. "You will figure something out. Maybe community college, maybe a certificate program. You do not need to aim so high. Be realistic, Rachel. Be realistic. What he meant was stay small. The conversation went on without me. They talked about move-in dates and dorm decor and which boutique might have the right dress for Madeline's farewell party. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, I felt something in my chest close gently, like a door shutting from the inside, not with drama, not with screaming, just a quiet click. I did not cry. Instead, I made a decision. If the people who were supposed to believe in me refused to see me, I would learn to see myself. Leaving home did not happen with some cinematic blow-up. There was no screaming match on the lawn, no suitcases thrown dramatically down the stairs. That kind of scene would have given my parents too much power in the story. In the end, it happened the way most important choices in my life did, quietly and without their permission. I enrolled in the local community college, the only thing I could afford without help. I worked mornings at a diner off the highway pouring coffee and memorizing regulars' orders, then spent afternoons in cramped classrooms learning the fundamentals of programming and database management. At night, I cleaned offices in a downtown building that smelled like old carpet and copier toner. Sleep became optional. Money stayed tight. And my parents stayed consistent. Every time I dragged myself into their kitchen after a long shift smelling like bacon grease or disinfectant, my father would gesture at me with his fork and offer his favorite line. See, this is what happens when you do not make smart choices. My mother would nod, always ready to reinforce the narrative. Madeline will have a degree. She will marry someone successful. She will never have to work herself to the bone like this. You could have learned from her. Learned what I used to wonder. How to fold myself into whatever shape made other people comfortable. Madeline loved it, of course. The imbalance. The subtle digs she fed on the attention, like it was oxygen. One Christmas Eve, when I was 19, we hosted my aunt and uncle and a couple of neighbors. The house was full of cinnamon candles and Christmas carols playing too loud from the television. Everyone gathered in the living room, plates balanced on knees, glasses clinking lightly. Someone asked politely how college was going for me. I opened my mouth to answer, to say something about transferring to a 4-year program once I finished my credits, about the freelance web project I had just landed that might help me cut back one of my jobs. Madeline spoke first. School. She laughed, tossing her hair. Rachel is not built for academics. She is better at wiping tables than taking exams. The room laughed. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough. My mother giggled into her wine glass. My father shook his head like he was bemused but not surprised. You know she is not wrong, he said. You are more hands-on. That is not a bad thing. The world needs workers too. Guests exchanged those polite, uncomfortable smiles that say, this is not funny, but we do not know how to stop it. A couple of people glanced toward me, waiting for me to laugh it off. I did not. Something in me hardened like wet cement drying all at once. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the guests had gone and the house had gone quiet, I sat on the edge of my bed in the dim light from the hallway. I looked around at the room I had grown up in. The posters, the cluttered desk, the stack of textbooks with neon sticky notes poking out. It all felt small. Not in a cozy way. In a suffocating way. Without allowing myself too much time to think, I pulled out the duffel bag from my closet. I folded jeans, work uniforms, the one nice blouse I owned. I grabbed my laptop, the spiral notebook where I scribbled ideas for apps between shifts, and the tiny flash drive that held every bit of code I cared about. I did not leave a note. I did not wake anyone. I slipped my bag over my shoulder, crept down the stairs, and walked out into the chilly night, my breath puffing in small white clouds in front of me. I had $200 in my account and no real plan, but I had one thing that mattered more than any of that. I was done letting people who could not see me dictate the size of my life. Savannah's little regional airport looked almost sleepy in the pre-dawn hours when I bought a one-way ticket to Austin. I chose the city because I had seen an online ad for a startup internship there the week before, and bookmarked it like a wish. I landed in Texas with one duffel bag and a stomach full of anxiety. The first months were brutal. I rented a room in a falling-apart bungalow, in a neighborhood that buzzed with cicadas at night. I took the bus to an entry-level tech support job during the day and coded on an ancient laptop at a 24-hour coffee shop. After hours, I taught myself new languages, read open source documentation like it was scripture, and slept when my body gave me no other choice. The internship I had seen in that ad, I did not get it. But 3 months later, when a tiny health tech startup posted that they needed someone scrappy and obsessed with solving problems, I sent them a portfolio of my messy, patched together code. The founder, a woman named Elena Rivera, called me in for an interview in a co-working space that smelled like burnt espresso and whiteboard markers. She sat across from me, her dark hair in a loose bun, her laptop covered in stickers about women in tech and public health. "You wrote this triage algorithm on your own?" she asked, tapping the printed code I had brought. I nodded, trying not to fidget. "For a community college project, I have been tweaking it since." She read in silence for what felt like forever. Finally, she leaned back, eyes sharp. "Do you know what clinics pay consultants to try and build something half this good?" I shook my head. "More than you would believe," she said. "How would you feel about coming on as a junior developer?" I blinked. "I do not have a 4-year degree yet." She lifted one shoulder. "Neither did I when I started. I care more about your brain than your paperwork, and your brain is clearly not meant for wiping tables." The laugh that escaped me was half shock, half relief. That moment, sitting in a borrowed chair in a noisy co-working space, was the first time in my life an adult looked at what I loved and said it was valuable. I took the job, and for the first time, the story of my life started to feel like it might belong to me. Startups have their own kind of chaos, especially the kind that grow faster than anyone expects. Elena's company. Clearline Health began as 3 people sharing 2 desks and one overworked printer. Within 2 years, we had taken over half the co-working floor and were fighting for meeting rooms like they were endangered species. Our product was not flashy. We were not chasing social media clout or designing apps to make people scroll longer. We built tools that helped understaffed clinics triage patients, manage appointments, and flag urgent cases before they slipped through cracks. It was unglamorous and life-changing at the same time. I loved it. I loved the late nights debugging code with my headphones on the whiteboard walls covered in scribbled flowcharts, the way Elena would clap once, sharp and bright, when a stubborn bug finally yielded. She was the first person who challenged me, not because she doubted me, but because she believed I could do more. "You are seeing patterns no one else bothers to look for," she told me once, eyes narrowing at a dashboard I had built. "Lean into that." I did. I designed a predictive scheduling system that reduced wait times for patients by almost half. In some clinics, I built a back-end tool that flagged bottlenecks in intake forms before they caused log jams. For the first time in my life, my tendency to obsess over tiny details was not a flaw, it was an asset. My parents knew none of this. They still assumed I was trying things out in Texas the way people experimented with hairstyles. When we spoke, which was rare, they asked how the little job was going and then pivoted quickly to Madeline's life. Madeline had launched a lifestyle blog around the time I moved to Austin. At first, it was a hobby recipes outfit, posts tips for organizing closets. With my parents' help and one of my father's well-connected golfing buddies, it grew into a full-blown brand called Madeline at the Manor, complete with staged photo shoots in rented homes and partnerships with mid-tier candle companies. I watched from a distance as she posted photos in gauzy dresses, holding coffee mugs on rented porches. My mother shared every update on social media with captions like, "So proud of our girl." My father boasted at every opportunity that Madeline was building an empire. The irony was almost funny. By the time Clearline Health landed a contract with a major hospital network, I was leading a small development team. Elena brought me into strategy meetings, asked my opinion in front of investors, credited my work without a hint of hesitation. The day she gathered us in the cramped break room and announced that Clearline had received an acquisition offer from a national healthcare tech corporation, I felt the 19-year-old version of myself stir uneasily inside my chest. I could still hear my father's voice telling me tech was not a real path. My mother's dismissive shrug about me staring at screens. Elena paced in front of us, hands moving as she talked. "They are offering an 8-figure package," she said. "This will give our platform reach we could never have achieved alone. And I made sure the deal honors the people who built this with me." She looked straight at me, then eyes fierce. "You are all getting equity payouts," she said, "based on your contributions. If anyone deserves to have their life rewritten by this, it is you." I will never forget sitting at my tiny apartment table weeks later, staring at the numbers on the payout document. My cut was not billionaire money. It was not private island money, but it was more money than my parents had ever seen at one time. More importantly, it was money I had earned with nothing but my stubbornness and a laptop. I did not buy a luxury car. I did not drop a down payment on a high-rise condo. I did not send my parents a screenshot with a smug "told you so." Instead, I hired a financial planner recommended by Elena's lawyer. We built a wall of safety around that money. Then I registered a consulting firm in my own name. Cole Systems quietly began taking on projects that bigger companies had mishandled: rural clinics, trying to modernize nonprofits drowning in spreadsheets, small hospital networks, desperate for better data. Word traveled the way it always does when you do good work and answer emails on time. I flew to Minneapolis in February one year and nearly froze walking between parking garages and hospital doors. I spent 2 steamy weeks in July in New Orleans, sweating through blazers as I trained staff. I spent long nights in hotel rooms, fixing bugs and tinkering with ideas for what I really wanted to build. It was on one of those trips, sitting alone in a mediocre hotel bar in Jacksonville, after a day of meetings, that I opened an email from an architecture site I subscribed to and saw the first photo of Harbor House. The estate sat on a barrier island off the South Carolina coast, all white columns and wraparound porches with live oaks dripping Spanish moss, and wide lawns sloping down toward the water. It had been built by an eccentric shipping magnate in the 1920s and later restored by a reclusive sculptor who had turned the old carriage house into a studio with massive north-facing windows. The headline read, "Historic Harbor House Estate to be sold at private auction." I clicked faster than I meant to. As I scrolled through the photos, something inside me went quiet. The grand staircases and sweeping verandas were stunning, sure, but what caught my breath were the odd spaces. A long, sun-drenched room with skylights installed at deliberate angles filling the floorboards with light. A vaulted hall off the main house with freakishly good acoustics originally designed for chamber music. A small library cozy and shadowed with built-in shelves begging for laptops and notebooks. I saw more than a mansion. I saw a campus, a refuge, an engine. In my mind, without trying, I began to imagine rows of desks where young women in hoodies would lean over code together. I pictured older women who had spent their lives raising children or working in low-wage jobs, sitting in that sunlit hall, learning to write their first lines of SQL. I saw late-night hackathons in the old carriage house, whiteboards filled with ideas to fix problems no one else bothered to notice. The idea hit so hard it made me set my drink down. What if this could be the headquarters for a foundation I had been daydreaming about but never dared say out loud? A place where women who had been told they were too old or too soft or not smart enough for tech could prove everyone wrong. What if the girl who once left home with a duffel bag and a bruised heart could build a home for every version of herself that had ever felt unwelcome? I bookmarked the listing. I told myself it was just a fantasy. Then, barely a week later, my mother posted a photo online of Madeline holding a glossy real estate brochure in my parents' kitchen. The caption read, "Big moves coming for our girl. Harbor House would be the perfect backdrop for Madeline." At the manor, do you not think? The room tilted. The estate I had just envisioned as a sanctuary for women like me had appeared on my family's radar as the ultimate prop for my sister's brand. In that moment, fantasy became mission. And mission for me has always been where revenge and purpose quietly shake hands. The first time I saw Harbor House in person, it was from the public beach across the narrow inlet. I had flown into Charleston 3 days before the auction under the pretense of meeting a hospital client. That meeting lasted exactly 2 hours. The rest of my time, I spent driving around the island, memorizing the roads, mapping my own resolve, standing on the sand in worn sneakers, hair yanked back in a messy bun. I watched the estate rise in the distance, like something out of a movie my sister would have obsessed over. Sunlight slid across white columns and glass, turning the windows into mirrors. From that far away, you could not smell the old wood or hear the creak of the shutters. You just saw beauty, money, possibility. I saw a choice. I had spent a lifetime living with the consequences of my family's choices. Their favoritism, their dismissals, their constant grinding insistence that my life was destined to be smaller than my sister's. Buying Harbor House was never about proving them wrong. It was about choosing, finally, not to let them own the narrative of my life. Still, as I sat in my rental car later that day, staring at the auction paperwork spread across the passenger seat. I could hear the ghosts of my parents' voices in my head. Be realistic, Rachel. Do you even understand how much that kind of property costs? What would you even do with something like that? In the past, those questions might have stopped me. But I had spent years building more than software and savings accounts. I had built a track record. Cole Systems was not just surviving, it was thriving. My financial planner had practically begged me to diversify, and we had already run scenarios of what a major real estate purchase tied to a nonprofit structure would look like. I had the consulting income, the clear-line payout, and a network of donors and partners I had cultivated quietly for years. Women Elena had introduced me to clinic directors who had seen what my work could do. Investors who liked my stubborn streak. When I sent my banker the projected bidding range, he did not flinch. "We can position you comfortably up to $20 million, he said. "Anything beyond that, and I would be urging you to reconsider. But for your goals, this is doable." Doable. I printed the pre-approval documentation and placed it in a folder. I forwarded the foundation's preliminary charter to the law firm I had hired in Charleston to make sure the tax structure would hold. I looped in my operations director, a no-nonsense woman named Tessa, who handled numbers like they were puzzle pieces. Her email came back an hour later. "If you get this property anywhere under $16 million and the renovation estimates hold, the foundation is not just sustainable, it is powerful," she wrote. "If you want my professional opinion, I think you should go for it." I sat back in my hotel chair, the cheap upholstery scratching my arms. I thought of the 19-year-old version of myself dragging a duffel bag out into the dark because she could not breathe in her own parents' house. I thought of the waitress version of myself balancing coffee cups and counting tips. I thought of every time I heard a woman on my teams talk about feeling too old to switch careers, too tired to start over, too ashamed to admit she wanted more. The girl my parents had written off was sitting on the edge of a decision that could change hundreds of lives. I replied to Tessa with 2 words: "I am in." On the morning of the auction, I did what I always do when my nerves threatened to run away with me. I made a list. On the hotel notepad I wrote, 1. I am not here to impress anyone. 2. I am not here to save my family from their own choices. 3. Harbor House will become a place where women like me never have to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. 4. Whether I win or lose, I am already living a life they never believed I was capable of. I folded the paper and slipped it into my tote bag. And then I walked out, took the elevator down, and drove to the Charleston Harbor Club, where my family would find out in the most public way possible that the daughter they had dismissed had quietly outgrown their control. You already know what greeted me in the courtyard. Madeline's mockery, my father's joke about coupons, my mother's dramatic bless her heart. What you do not know yet is what it felt like to stand there and not react, to feel the old shame nudge at my ribs, and watch it dissolve before it could take root. Inside, when the registration clerk handed me that paddle and said the words "full private bidding range," I felt my past and present collide so hard I almost had to steady myself on the table. My family's laughter died behind me like someone had cut a wire. I did not look back at them. Not yet. Instead, I found a seat in the back row of the auction hall, beneath a crystal chandelier, shaped like a frozen waterfall. People around me murmured about zoning laws and foundation repairs. The faint clink of ice and glasses drifted from the sidebar. Staff slipped between rows, passing out property packets and number cards. From where I sat, I could see everything. The stage where the auctioneer would stand. The front row seats reserved for the heaviest hitters. The middle rows where wealthy couples sat with their advisors. And off to the right, a cluster of chairs where my parents and Madeline had planted themselves like they were settling in for a coronation. Madeline wore, white of course, a fitted coat with a belt tied in a perfect knot, her auburn hair blowing around her shoulders as she turned to make sure people saw her. My mother leaned in, whispering in her ear, adjusting a strand of hair that was already perfect. My father sat back with the relaxed posture of a man utterly convinced the world was about to affirm his assumptions. The lights dimmed slightly as the auctioneer took the stage. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice warm and practiced. "Today we have the privilege of presenting Harbor House, a historic coastal estate, with a starting bid of $8 million. $8 million. That would have once sounded like another language to me. Now it was just the first number in a series. As he detailed the acreage, the restoration work, the private dock rights, I let his words wash over me. My focus narrowed to my breath, the paddle in my hand, the quiet hum of my own intention. I knew my family's pre-approval tier. That list had been posted in the lobby, names replaced with registration numbers, tiers marked by color codes for staff. Most people would not have known what the colors meant, but I had built enough systems in my life to decode patterns. My parents and Madeline were cleared up to $14.5 million. They believed that put them in the highest bracket. They believed no one would go beyond that, for a house that required as much maintenance as Harbor House did. Belief can be comforting. Belief can also be a blindfold. I sat there anonymous in the back row holding a paddle that could carry me well past their limit. And I waited, because revenge when it is rooted in purpose does not need to shout. It only needs to be patient. When the bidding started, it rose fast and sharp like a gull catching a current. 8.5 million called a man in the front row, his navy suit crisp, his jaw clean-shaven and confident. 9 million answered a woman with a silver bob and a simple black dress, one of those quiet bidders people underestimate until they do not. 9.5, someone behind a column. 10, the auctioneer's rhythm never faltered. His voice climbed and fell like music. Madeline waited a few rounds before she lifted her paddle, savoring the moment. When she finally did, she did it with a little flourish like she was on camera. 10.2, she said, bright and clear. My mother squeezed her arm. My father smiled, proud and proprietary. I stayed silent. The wood of my paddle was cool under my fingertips. The numbers kept climbing. 10.5, 11, 11.3. The man in the front row bowed out at 11.4. The woman with the silver bob dropped her paddle to her lap at 11.6. One by one, bidders surrendered. You could feel the room narrowing, the energy focusing on the stubborn few who remained. By $12 million, only 4 bidders were left. Madeline, a pair of investors from Atlanta I recognized from an article about coastal resort development. A middle-aged man sitting alone, his expression unreadable. His blazer slightly wrinkled, which made me think he might actually care about the property more than the optics. My heart beat in my throat, but my mind was clear. Tessa's voice echoed in my memory. If you get it under $16 million, we can more than make the numbers work. The bankers had set my limit at $20 million, but I had set my own line lower. Money is not just math, it is values. It is sleep at night. I watched as the developers dropped out at 12.8 after a quick whispered argument with their advisor. The solitary man pushed one more time up to $13 million before wincing and shaking his head. When the auctioneer called 13.2, he exhaled, lowered his paddle and stared at the floor. That left Madeline. And me. She did not know we were the last two. She had never learned to look beyond herself in any room, and this one was no exception. 13.5, she called out, voice tight but proud. Murmurs rippled through the hall. My mother looked like she might burst with excitement. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hungry to savor every second of their perceived victory. This is psychological warfare now, he whispered to my mother, loud enough for the row behind him to hear. Anyone who pushes past this is foolish. I almost laughed. The auctioneer called out 13.5 million going once. Silence. Do I hear 13.7? Nothing. 13.5 going twice. Madeline shifted in her seat, smoothing her coat, already picturing herself on that wraparound porch, taking photos with steaming mugs and curated blankets. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I slid it out and glanced down. A text from Tessa. Funds wired, lines of credit open. You are clear. Do what you came to do. My throat tightened. I locked the screen. My hand closed around the paddle. The auctioneer inhaled, lifting his gavel ready to close Harbor House forever, to anyone but my sister. 14 million, I said. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The hall was so quiet you could hear the soft glide of the auctioneer's shoes as he startled and turned. Every head swiveled toward the back row. Madeline's chair squealed against the floor as she jerked around to stare at me. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. The auctioneer cleared his throat. We have a new bid, he announced, recovering his composure. $14 million from bidder number 72, Ms. Rachel Cole. He emphasized my name, and I knew immediately it was intentional. Auctioneers liked drama as much as anyone. My parents' faces registered the words at different speeds. First confusion, then shock, then something uglier. No, my mother whispered. No, 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 that cannot be right. Madeline shot to her feet. She cannot, she snapped, pointing at me as if she could erase me from the proceedings by sheer will. She does not have that kind of money. She is lying. The room shifted, discomfort and fascination mixing. A few people were clearly embarrassed for her. Others were leaning forward, delighted by the unexpected family drama. Old Money loved nothing more than watching other people's dirty laundry flutter in the breeze. The auctioneer lifted a hand, smoothing the tension. Ms. Cole's credentials have been fully verified, he said. She is cleared for the full private bidding range. $14 million. Do I hear 14.2? Madeline's face flushed so red I thought she might faint. She looked at my parents, eyes wide, demand and panic colliding. My father's jaw clenched. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Pride, humiliation, finances, reputation. 14.2, he hissed at her. We can go to 14.5. That is it. You must win. She lifted her paddle with a shaky hand. 14.2, she said, each word squeezed out like it hurt. The auctioneer nodded. 14.2. Do I hear 14.5? My heart pounded so hard it blurred my vision for half a second. I thought of Harbor House as a backdrop for a lifestyle blog, another surface for Madeline to spread her curated life across. I thought of Harbor House as a campus for women, like the waitress I had met in Jacksonville, who whispered to me that she had once wanted to study computer science, but dropped out when her father told her she was wasting tuition. I thought of 19-year-old me standing in a dark yard with a duffel bag, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake walking away. I raised my paddle without trembling. 15 million, I said. My voice sounded oddly calm even to my own ears. The number dropped into the room like a stone into still water. The auctioneer repeated it, savoring the drama. $15 million from Ms. Cole. For a second, no one moved. Then chaos. The quiet kind began. Gasps, whispers. A tangle of emotion rippling through every row. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's shoulders slumped just a fraction, like someone had let the air out of him. Madeline swayed, then grabbed the back of her chair to steady herself. She is bluffing, Madeline said, but it came out thin, more like a plea than a declaration. My father shook his head, the fight draining out of his voice. We are at our limit, he muttered. We cannot top that, Madeline. There it was, the boundary of their reach, the line they could not cross. The auctioneer gave them one last chance. Do I hear 15.1? He called. 15 million going once. Silence. Going twice, Madeline whispered. Please. But whether she was begging my parents the room or some god she never otherwise mentioned, I could not tell. The gavel came down with a crisp crack that echoed against the high ceiling. Sold, the auctioneer announced, beaming. Harbor House is sold to Ms. Rachel Cole. I did not close my eyes. I did not gasp. I just sat there and let the reality of it sink into my bones. The estate my family had decided belonged to Madeline had just become the headquarters of a future they had never bothered to imagine for me. Not because I snatched it out of spite, but because I had quietly built the power to choose. That is the thing about revenge when it is rooted in justice. You do not have to raise your voice. You just have to be willing to walk into the room they told you did not belong to you and claim the life you built while they were not paying attention. The moment the gavel fell, the spell of auction room politeness snapped. People stood talking in low, excited voices. Staff began gathering clipboards and ushering winning bidders toward a side room to finalize paperwork. The chandelier above us sparkled as if it were pleased by the drama. I stayed seated for a beat longer, my hands resting lightly on my knees. My heart raced, but not the way it did when I was afraid. This was something else, something steadier, like adrenaline braided with relief. Eventually, I stood and made my way up the aisle, the paddle hanging loosely at my side. Bodies shifted to let me pass. A couple near the end of the row smiled at me, the woman's eyes full of a warmth that made my throat tighten. Congratulations, she said. What do you plan to do with the place? I could have answered with something vague. Instead, I told her the truth. I am turning it into a foundation. I said, for women in tech, and for women who want to be but were told it was not for them. Her smile widened. That is beautiful. Her husband nodded. Best use of that house I have heard all day. I carried their words with me as I stepped out into the corridor that led toward the registration offices. The air out there smelled like paper printer ink and disinfectant wipes. Staff moved briskly between offices, their heels clicking on the tile. Ms. Cole. A man in a navy blazer called out, glancing at his tablet. "If you will come with me, we can get the first round of documents signed." I followed him into a glass-walled room, where already a neat stack of papers waited on a polished table. As he started his practiced explanation of deposit timelines and inspection contingencies, I felt a presence appear in the doorway behind us like a change in temperature. "Rachel," my father's voice, tight, hard. I turned. There they were, my mother's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes glassy but angry. "My father?" His jaw clenched, his tie slightly askew in a way I had never seen in public. Madeline, her perfect makeup starting to crack around the edges, fury rolling off her in waves. "We need to talk," my father said. The staffer glanced between us. Uncomfortable. "I can give you a few minutes," he offered, already stepping toward the door. "Thank you," I said. He closed it gently behind him. Silence stretched for a beat, thick and heavy. Madeline broke first. "What the hell was that?" she demanded, voice pitching high. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You destroyed my chance at turning this into something real. Do you have any idea what Harbor House would have done for my brand?" I blinked. "My brand?" she repeated, as if I had not understood Madeline. At the Manor, Harbor House was going to be my signature. The photos, the retreats, the content, the candles, I said quietly before I could stop myself. She flinched. My mother stepped forward. "Do not talk to your sister like that," she snapped. "You blindsided us, Rachel. How could you not tell us you were planning something like this?" I studied her face, searching for any hint of curiosity about how I had managed to be in this position at all. There was none. Only indignation that I had disrupted their script. My father folded his arms. "Buying that house out from under your own family," he said. "That is low even for you." Old habits wanted to drag me backward, to make me apologize, to minimize myself, to explain. I felt that familiar instinct rise like a reflex. Then I remembered sitting at my kitchen table in Austin, staring at an acquisition offer that had changed my entire life. I remembered Elena's fierce belief in me, the hundreds of hours I had spent building, not for applause but for impact. I remembered the list I had written that morning. 1. I am not here to impress anyone. 2. I am not here to save my family from their own choices. I slid into a chair at the table and folded my hands. "I did not buy Harbor House out from under you. I said I bought a property that was up for public auction, just like everyone else." Madeline scoffed. "Do not play semantics with me. You knew I wanted it." "I did not know that until I saw your post with the brochure," I said. By then I had already started the paperwork for the foundation. "My plans did not start with you, Madeline. They never did." She recoiled like I had slapped her. My mother narrowed her eyes. "What foundation?" "A nonprofit trust. I said Harbor House will be a campus for women learning tech skills, coding data systems. Women who want to start over, women no one else took seriously." My father actually laughed. "You cannot be serious. You are going to waste that estate on classes." I tilted my head, studying him. "You mean I am not going to use it as a backdrop for sponsored posts about scented soap?" His face went crimson. "We raised you," he snapped. "We gave you a home, a car, food. You gave me a roof?" I interrupted softly. "You gave Madeline a future." There is a difference. They were not used to me interrupting. It threw them off balance. "This is jealousy," my mother insisted, seizing on a new angle. "You have always resented your sister. You could not stand the idea of her having something this grand, so you swooped in to ruin it." I shook my head. "I did not buy Harbor House to ruin her dream. I said I bought it to fulfill mine." Madeline's mouth opened, then closed. She looked lost for a second, stripped of the script where everything was always about her. "What dream?" she whispered, and for just a moment I heard the little girl she once was instead of the brand manager she had become. I could have used that vulnerability to hurt her, thrown her own cruelty back at her, listed every time she had laughed at me across a dinner table. Instead, I told the truth. The dream of creating a place where no girl has to sit through Christmas dinner being told she is destined for wiping tables. I said, where no woman hears that she is too old or too late or too stupid to learn how to do what she loves. Something in my mother's face flickered. Regret, maybe? Or at least recognition. My father scowled. "You could have chosen any other building in any other city," he said. "Why this one?" "Because you chose it too," I thought. "Because part of me wanted you to see with your own eyes what you threw away when you decided only one of your daughters deserved investment. But that was not the whole truth." "This house fits," I said. "The layout, the light, the separate spaces. It is perfect for classrooms and labs and dorm rooms. The history matters. The bones matter. And yes, I will not lie. There is a certain justice in putting something you saw as a prop into actual service. Madeline's eyes filled with tears, but they were not the soft kind. They were hot, angry. "You stole my one shot," she whispered. I looked at her. Really looked, and saw how much of her life had been built around being chosen, being adored, being the center. "You have never had only one shot," I said. "You have had dozens. You just never had to build any of them yourself." Her mouth trembled. My father stepped between us, blocking my view of her. "If you think we are going to let you cut us out of this entirely," he said, "you are mistaken. We are still your family." I let that word sit for a moment. Family. A word that had always cost me more than it gave. "I am not cutting you out of anything," I said quietly. "I am simply not inviting you into something you did not help build." He blinked. My mother's shoulders sagged just a fraction. Madeline whispered, "You cannot do this." "Yes," I said, "I can." The staffer knocked gently and peeked into the room. "Ms. Cole." "I am so sorry, but we do need to get started," he said. "Other buyers are waiting." For a heartbeat, my father looked like he might fight him too. Then he squared his shoulders and turned back to me. "This is not over," he said. For the first time, I believed otherwise. "Yes," I replied, "it is." Not with drama, not with screaming, just with a quiet certainty that bordered on peace. As they left, my mother glanced back at me one more time. Eyes glossy. I could not tell if she was sad or angry, or simply stunned. Maybe all of it. The door closed behind them. I sat down, picked up the pen, and started signing the papers that would sever the last invisible cords tying my future to their approval. Outside, the harbor glittered under the Carolina sun. Inside, I began the next chapter of my life with ink strokes and a resolve that no one in my family had ever seen in me, because they had never bothered to look. Moving into Harbor House as its new owner felt like walking into a life I had glimpsed only in daydreams. The first time I drove up the long, oak-lined driveway with the keys jangling softly in my hand, the estate did not feel like a trophy. It felt like responsibility. The windows reflected the morning light, throwing flecks of brightness across the white columns and weathered brick. The air smelled like salt and magnolia. Gulls cried somewhere beyond the tree line. For a moment, I just sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring. "This is mine," I whispered, testing the words. "Not my parents', not Madeline's, not a prop. Mine." Of course, legally, it did not belong only to me. The foundation charter had been filed. Harbor House was now the primary asset of the Cole Harbor Initiative, a nonprofit with a board bylaws and all the necessary paperwork. I had set it up that way deliberately. This was never meant to be my private playground. It was meant to be a working engine. That first week, the estate hummed with professionals. Architects walked the property with clipboards and laser measures, muttering about load-bearing walls and electrical upgrades. A structural engineer crawled through the basement, emerging dusty but pleased. The interior designer, I had hired a blunt, warm woman named Kelsey, trailed behind me through the main hall, scribbling notes. "You want this foyer to feel less like a museum and more like a welcome center," she said, tapping her pen against a banister. "Benches. Plants. A place for women to sit when they first walk in. Maybe fighting every instinct not to turn around and run back to their old lives." I smiled. Exactly. We walked into the long, sunlit room with skylights. Dust motes floated in the air, spinning lazily. The worn floors creaked under our feet. "This," I said, sweeping my hand, "is going to be the main classroom." Kelsey nodded slowly, eyes scanning the walls. "Tables that can move," she said. "Whiteboards from floor to ceiling. A projection system. Good chairs. None of those horrible metal ones that make you feel like you are back in a high school that hated you." My chest ached with unexpected tenderness. "Comfort matters," I said. "Comfort is the difference between staying and leaving," she replied. "Especially for women who have been told they do not belong here." Downstairs in what used to be a music hall, we planned labs. Not sterile ones with cold metal counters, but warm ones with workstations, soldering irons, small server racks, and quiet corners for anyone who needed to step away and breathe. "This one," I told the contractor, pointing to a smaller room off the main hall, "needs extra insulation. I want it to be a soundproof space for phone calls, for crying, for breathing, for whatever someone needs." He raised an eyebrow but nodded. We can do that. In one of the upstairs wings, we planned dorm rooms. Not many Harbor House was not going to be a massive overnight campus. But there would be enough beds for a handful of women who needed to travel. Women who did not have the luxury of a second home nearby. Kelsey made notes about linens and lamps. No bunk beds, she said. We want them to feel like guests, not campers. Every choice we made, from the color palette to the light fixtures, was filtered through one question. Will this help a woman who has been dismissed her whole life feel, maybe for the first time, like she belongs here? It was exhausting and exhilarating. In between design meetings and contractor calls, I ran coal systems from a temporary office set up in what used to be a formal sitting room. My laptop sat on a folding table. A tangle of cords connected routers and monitors and printers. It looked ridiculous against the ornate fireplace and wainscoting. It felt perfect. Late one afternoon, as the sun slanted low and turned the marshes beyond the property to hammered copper, Kelsey found me on the back veranda staring at the water. You know, she said, leaning against the rail, I keep waiting for the story where you tell me this is all about sticking it to your family. I huffed a little laugh. Is that what you think it is? She shrugged. I have worked with enough clients who buy big houses to make a point. 9 times out of 10, the point is, look what I can afford now. I watched a pelican skim the surface of the inlet wings, just barely brushing the water. I would be lying if I said there was no satisfaction in proving them wrong. I said, there is. I am human. Good, she said. I would have been worried if there were not. But that is not why I am doing this, I continued. If I wanted to show off, I could have bought a condo in Miami and posted photos from the balcony for the rest of my life. She snorted. True. This place, it is bigger than them, I said. When I read those articles about how women are still underrepresented in tech, how midlife career switchers get told they are too late, I see all the faces I have met in clinics and cafes and conference hallways. Women whose eyes light up when they talk about what they wish they could do, and then dim when they talk about what they think they are allowed to do. I felt my throat tighten. My family did not break me, I said. They just pushed me out of a small life into a wider one. Now I get to hold the door open for other women. Kelsey was quiet for a moment. Then we should make sure this door is gorgeous, she said finally, and solid and impossible to miss. She tapped the railing. I am in, Rachel. Whatever it takes. The wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of waves. For the first time since the auction, I let myself imagine the estate full of life. Women laughing in the kitchen after late-night study sessions, mentors sharing coffee at long tables, whiteboards filled with ideas for apps and systems and companies that might exist one day. The future did not look like a perfect lifestyle photo. It looked messy and noisy and alive. In the middle of that vision, my phone buzzed on the railing, a text from an unknown number. We need to talk about this Harbor House thing. Call us love, Mom. I stared at the words, at the casual love tacked on like a bandage. For a long moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I realized ignoring it would not be enough. Ignoring still leaves the door cracked open, and I was finally ready to shut it. The article hit the internet exactly 2 months after the auction. I did not know a reporter was even writing it, until Elena forwarded me the link with a series of exclamation points. Former community college dropout buys historic harbor estate to launch tech foundation for women, the headline read. They did not get every detail right. They still called me a dropout, even though I had gone back later and finished my degree online. They simplified my time at Clearline Health into 3 neat paragraphs. But they got the heart of it. They quoted women I had worked with in clinics. One doctor talked about how our system had saved lives. A clinic director mentioned how I insisted on training staff personally, instead of handing them a manual. Elena described me as relentlessly practical and quietly radical. More importantly, the article showed Harbor House not as another rich person's getaway, but as a place that would belong to women no one else had bothered to invest in. Within hours, the story spread. Local news picked it up. Then a national morning show did a short segment. By afternoon, my inbox was overflowing. Messages from women in their 50s and 60s who had always wanted a career in tech but never had the chance. Messages from 20-something single mothers desperate to find a path out of dead-end jobs. Messages from women my age who had burned out of toxic workplaces and were craving something better. One message from a 62-year-old grandmother in Ohio made me cry in the middle of the half-finished Harbor House kitchen. I thought my life was over when I got laid off last year, she wrote. I am learning to code from videos alone at night, because no one takes me seriously. The fact that you are building a place for women like me makes me feel like maybe I am not foolish for still dreaming. I pressed my palms flat on the cool counter and let myself feel it. The weight, the awe, the responsibility. Harbor House was no longer just an idea in my head. It was a promise. And of course, promises draw attention. My parents called the next day. I did not pick up. They left voicemails instead. My mother's voice trembled slightly. Rachel, sweetheart, we saw the news. You are on television. Oh my goodness. Why did you not tell us we could have celebrated together? My father sounded less smooth. Looks like you have done well for yourself, he said. I am proud of you. I always knew you had it in you. That line nearly made me laugh out loud. Always knew. Sure, Madeline's text came last. Wow, she wrote. Big congrats on Harbor House. People keep tagging me, asking if we are going to collaborate. Maybe we can chat about a cross-promotion. This could be good for both our brands. Both our brands? As if we were simply two influencers negotiating a sponsored post. Part of me felt a slow, bitter amusement. They had not come to me when I was pulling double shifts and going to night classes. They had not checked on me when I was sick in my tiny Austin apartment alone and feverish coding between bouts of coughing because deadlines do not care about the flu. They had not reached out after the Clearline acquisition when my name was listed in a small paragraph at the bottom of a press release. They reached out now because the spotlight had landed on me. Not because they were proud of my work, because my work could be used. Elena called that evening, her face appearing on my laptop screen with her hair pulled back and dark circles under her eyes. You okay? She asked, skipping any preamble. I shrugged. Depends on what part you mean. The foundation, overwhelming but good. The media, terrifying but manageable. My family suddenly remembering I exist. That is new. She nodded slowly. They want in. Of course. Do you want them in? The question sat between us like a stone. I thought about the girl I had been, the things I had endured, the nights I had wished someone in my family would see me, really see me without comparison or critique. If they had reached out, then if they had apologized, then if they had offered support, then would I have forgiven them? Probably, but they had not. They had only shown up now that the world had decided I was worthy of attention. I do not want them near this, I said finally. Not the foundation, not Harbor House, not the women who will come here. My family still thinks in terms of optics. This place has to be about truth. Elena studied me for a moment. You know you are allowed to protect yourself, right? She said. You do not owe them access just because they are your parents, or because she is your sister. I know, I said, and for the first time I believed it. The next weekend, as construction crews worked on rewiring the East Wing, I drove into town to meet with a local attorney about drafting more explicit boundaries into the foundation's governance. On my way back, turning down the familiar oak-lined road, I saw a silver SUV parked just outside the gates. The vanity plate read Mads 1, Madeline's car. I slowed. 3 figures stood at the partially installed iron arch. My mother, my father, Madeline. They looked smaller somehow against the wide sky and the massive trees. As soon as they saw my car, they straightened, putting their public faces back on. I felt my stomach clench. Then I felt something else. Resolve. I pulled up to the gate, rolled down the window, and stepped out onto the gravel. The air smelled like pine and fresh-cut lumber from the ongoing work inside. Rachel, my mother said brightly, as if we had met by chance in a grocery store. We were just admiring the entry. It is beautiful. Madeline pushed her sunglasses up on her head, exposing eyes that were a little red around the rims. So she said, aiming for breezy and landing somewhere near brittle. You really did it. I did, I said. My father cleared his throat. We saw the news pieces, he said. Seems like you are doing something important here. I waited. He fumbled for the next part. We wanted to apologize, he said. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. Maybe we did not always handle things well when you were younger. Maybe we favored Madeline more than we should have. Families make mistakes. There it was, the partial apology, just enough to sound reasonable, not enough to really cost them anything. My mother jumped in. We would love to be involved in some way, she said. Fundraisers, galas. My ladies' group would go wild for this place. And imagine the exposure if Madeline featured it on her platforms. It would be good for your donations. Madeline nodded quickly. I could do a series on women in tech, she said. We could host retreats here. Empowerment weekends at the harbor. I already have a mood board. It would have been easy to say yes, to swallow my old hurt and let them in because it would be practical, because it might bring money, because that is what good daughters do. But the women who would walk through these gates one day needed more from me than practicality. They needed an example of boundaries, of self-respect, of choosing peace over obligation. No, I said. The word came out calm and firm. All three of them blinked. No, my father repeated like he had never heard the word in that context before. I am glad you see that what I am doing is important, I said. But you will not be part of it. There will be no joint fundraisers, no content collaborations, no pretending. We had a supportive relationship that led to this moment. My mother's smile froze. Rachel, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I replied. For the first time in my life, I am being completely reasonable with myself. Madeline folded her arms. So you are just cutting us off because things are finally going your way, she said. Nice. I stared at her for a long moment. I am not cutting you off because things are going my way. I said I am cutting you off because of how you treated me when nothing was. They did not speak. So I kept going. You ignored me when I needed help, I said. You mocked me when I took the only path I could afford. You called my dreams unrealistic and unfeminine. You told other people I was not built for success. You only reached out when my success became useful to you. The wind rustled the moss above us. Family is supposed to be where you are loved first, not where you are believed last. I said, I am done trying to fix something you never admitted was broken. My father's face hardened. We are still your parents, he said, and I will never forget that you taught me exactly how I do not want to treat the women who come here, I said quietly. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We can make this right, she whispered. I shook my head. Maybe you can make it right with yourselves, I said. But you do not get to make it right through my work. That belongs to me and to the women who will walk these halls. Not to you, not to your guilt, not to your image. Madeline swallowed. So that is it, she asked. We are done. Yes, I said we are. They stood there stunned, as if someone had pulled a rug out from under decades of assumptions. After a long, heavy silence, my father turned back toward the car. My mother followed, wiping her eyes. Madeline lingered for a heartbeat, looking at Harbor House with a mix of longing and something that almost looked like respect. You really built all this on your own, she asked. I built it with people who believed I could, I answered. That is almost the same thing. She nodded once. Then I guess you do not need me, she said softly. I did not answer. She turned and walked back to her car. When they drove away, dust rising behind their tires, the property felt different, lighter, like the air itself had been waiting for me to draw that line. Inside the gates, Harbor House belonged to the future. Whatever was left with my family belonged firmly in the past. 3 months after the encounter at the gate, the first phase of Harbor House was complete. The classrooms were wired, the labs were stocked, the dorm wings smelled like fresh paint and new linen. The old kitchen had been updated just enough to be functional without losing the deep farmhouse sink or the big windows that looked out over the marsh. Standing in the main classroom on opening day, I could barely hear the sound of my own thoughts over the thud of my heart. Rows of tables waited, each with a laptop, a notebook, and a small welcome card with a woman's name in careful script. The skylights bathed the room in gentle, diffused light. Whiteboards gleamed, ready for scribbles and diagrams. I walked between the tables, running my fingers along the edges. In a few hours, women would sit here who had fought their way through application essays and interviews and obstacles I could only begin to imagine. A 48-year-old single mother from Kansas who had worked nights at a warehouse to afford online classes. A 55-year-old woman from Georgia who had been passed over for promotions by younger male colleagues for 2 decades and had finally said enough. A 32-year-old nurse from Brooklyn who had seen too many broken systems and wanted to build better ones. Their stories ran through my head like a quiet chorus. I had read every single application letter. Some I had read twice. This is really happening, Kelsey said from the doorway, breaking my reverie. She held a stack of printed schedules and wore a grin that made her eyes crinkle. Are you ready? She asked. No, I said truthfully, but I am doing it anyway. She laughed and looped her arm through mine. That is all any of us are ever doing. The rest of the morning blurred by in tasks, checking in catering, running through orientation with the volunteer mentors, reviewing safety procedures with the staff, Every few minutes, my phone buzzed with messages from Elena and Tessa and other friends sending encouragement. At 10, the first shuttle of participants pulled up the drive. I watched from the upstairs balcony as women stepped onto the gravel shoulders. Stiff eyes wide, they carried wheeled suitcases and tote bags. Some clutched folders like shields. Others shoved their hands deep into pockets as if to hide how much they were shaking. I recognized that look. I had seen it in my own face once in the reflection of a bus window on the day I arrived in Austin. Fear, hope, something to lose, everything to gain. We gathered them in the foyer. I stood at the base of the staircase, hands wrapped around the banister to steady myself. "Welcome to Harbor House," I said. Voices quieted. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. For a terrifying second, I wanted to run. Then I remembered the woman from Ohio, the message that had made me cry in the half-finished kitchen. "I know walking into this hall took more than money and time. I said it took courage. Many of you have been told outright or indirectly that you are too old, too female, too tired, too tied down, too late, too something to do what you are about to do here." A few women nodded, eyes glistening. "Harbor House exists to prove those voices wrong," I continued. "This place is not about perfection. It is about persistence. It is not about being the smartest person in the room. It is about refusing to accept that entire rooms are off limits to you." I took a breath. "I was once told that engineering was not for girls," I said. "That I was not the genius type. That I was better suited for wiping tables than writing code. If I had believed that I would not be standing here, you would not be standing here. So for the duration of your time at Harbor House, I need you to agree to one thing." I paused. "To treat that old story about yourself like bad code," I said. "Outdated buggy. Something that needs to be replaced, not patched." A ripple of soft laughter broke the tension. "While you are here," I said, "this house belongs to you. Not to the donors, not to me. To you. Use it. Take up space. Ask questions. Make mistakes loudly. Be inconvenient. Be curious. Be stubborn. That is how we build something that lasts." The room felt different after that. Looser, brighter. Women broke into groups following volunteers to dorms and labs. Laughter started up in pockets. Someone plugged in a speaker in the kitchen and low music drifted through the house. In the midst of it all, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a number I did not recognize. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then, for reasons I still cannot fully explain, I stepped out onto the side porch and answered. "Hello." There was a pause. "Rachel," my mother's voice came through tinny over the line. I closed my eyes briefly. "How did you get this number?" I asked. "We saw the segment on the news," she said quickly, as if afraid I would hang up. "The one with the women arriving. They said there is an open house this afternoon for community members. We thought we might stop by just to see, to support." There it was again. The attempt to slip back in as if nothing had happened at the gate. In the background, I could hear my father's voice muffled. Madeline said something I could not make out. I leaned against the porch railing, staring out at the marsh. "There is an open house," I said. "For neighbors, for potential students, for local organizations. Not for you." Her breath hitched. "We are your family," she said. "Surely we can at least see what you have done." "You saw what I could do when I was a teenager," I said quietly. "You chose to pretend it was nothing. You do not get to show up now that the world has decided it is something. Not here. Not today." A long silence. "You cannot keep punishing us forever," she whispered. I thought of all the years I had punished myself instead, for not being enough, for not being what they wanted, for leaving, for staying away. "I am not punishing you," I said. "I am protecting myself. And the women in this house, they need to know there are places in this world where their value is not conditional. Harbor House is one of those places." I heard a soft sound on the line. A sniffle. Maybe a sigh. "I hope one day you will forgive us," she said. "I hope one day you will forgive yourselves," I replied. Then gently I ended the call. I blocked the number, stared at the quiet screen. Inside, laughter floated down the hall. One of the participants called my name, her voice bright and nervous. "Rachel." "We need help figuring out the Wi-Fi," she said, smiling. "We crashed it already." I slid my phone back into my pocket and walked inside. My past could wait outside the gate. My future was in the classroom, untangling code with women who had finally been invited to take up space. The first week of the Harbor House residency went by in a blur of coffee code and connection. In the mornings, the women gathered in the main classroom for lessons on fundamentals. We started with basic programming concepts, then moved to more complex topics. Some picked things up quickly, others struggled. Everyone had moments when they wanted to throw their laptops out the window, but they did it together. In the afternoons, they broke out into project groups. One team started designing an app to help caregivers coordinate schedules. Another explored building a scheduling tool for a local food pantry. A third dug into data sets from public health websites, trying to find patterns that might help clinics plan better. At night, the house glowed with warm light. Laughter spilled from the kitchen as they cooked simple meals together. Conversations hummed in the library and the dorm wing out on the porch. More than once, I walked past a doorway and had to stop and just listen. I thought I was the only one who ever heard that a woman in her 50s said one night that I was too old to start over. Another laughed bitterly. My ex-husband told me no one hires women with gray hair in tech. I am going to make sure he is wrong. Their words felt like balm on parts of me I had not known were still raw. Halfway through the residency, a local news crew came to film a short feature. The reporter, a young woman with curly hair and a sharp blazer, interviewed participants on the porch. "What does it feel like to be here?" she asked one. The woman, a 49-year-old former administrative assistant from Alabama, smiled shyly at the camera. "It feels like someone finally took me seriously," she said. The segment aired that evening. What I did not expect was who else saw it. The next morning, as I walked from the main hall to the labs, one of the volunteers intercepted me, her eyes a little wide. "There is someone at the gate asking for you," she said. "She says she is your grandmother." I stopped. My mother's mother. Clara had always been a quieter presence in my life. She lived 2 hours away when I was growing up and visited a few times a year. She had not interfered in the way my parents treated me, but she had not joined in either. She had been neutral. Distant, a nice hug twice a year and a card on my birthday. I had not seen her in years. Now she was here, at Harbor House. In the middle of the first residency, my stomach fluttered. "Keep everyone inside," I told the volunteer. "I will handle it." At the gate, an older woman stood holding the rail, her white hair pulled back in a loose bun, her dress simple but neat. Beside her, a man I recognized as her neighbor from long ago waited patiently, keys jangling in his hand. "Grandma?" I asked, stepping closer. She turned, and for a moment I saw the same eyes I had looked into as a child, only now framed by more wrinkles, and a softness that had not been there before. "Rachel," she said. Her voice cracked on my name. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not unkindly but not warmly, either. I did not know how to be warm with her. Not yet. "I saw you on the news," she said. "Twice, actually. Once about the house. Once about the women. I asked your mother about it. She did not say much, so I asked around until I figured out how to get here." She took a breath. "I wanted to see it with my own eyes," she said. "And I wanted to see you." The wind tugged at the hem of her dress. I studied her. "Why now?" I asked. She flinched. "I am old," she said bluntly. "Older than I like to admit. When you get to my age, you start thinking about the things you did not do, the things you should have said, the people you did not stand up for." She met my gaze, and for the first time in my life, there was no distance in her eyes. "Your mother was always so proud of Madeline," she said. "I saw how it was. I heard the way they spoke about you. I knew it was wrong. And I stayed quiet because it was not my house, not my children, because I told myself it was not my place." Her hands trembled on the rail. "That was a cowardly thing to do," she said. Silence stretched between us. "I do not expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I just did not want to die without saying I am sorry. You deserve someone in your corner. I should have been that someone. You were always the one who saw more thought, deeper. I should have nurtured that." I swallowed hard. Of all the things I had imagined hearing at that gate, that was not one of them. Behind me, Harbor House creaked lightly as it settled in the morning sun. Inside those walls, women were starting their day, opening laptops, pouring coffee, taking risks. I had drawn a hard line with my parents because every interaction with them felt like walking barefoot on glass. This felt different. "Why did you not say anything then?" I asked. The question came out smaller than I meant it to. She looked out over the marsh. "Because I grew up being told a woman's job was to keep the peace, not make trouble," she said. "I told myself I was being respectful, Really, I was being afraid. It is funny. You think courage is for big dramatic moments, but it is the small ones that haunt you. The things you did not say at the dinner table. The times you laughed at a joke that was not funny because you did not want to be the only one not laughing. She shook her head. I am not asking you to invite me in, she said. I just wanted you to know that someone in this family sees what you are doing and is proud. Truly proud. Not because of the house, but because of what you built it for. My throat burned. I could have told her to leave. I could have turned away. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. Do you want to see the garden? I asked. Her eyes widened. I will stay by the gate, she said quickly. I do not want to intrude. The garden is inside the gate, I said. It is small. We planted herbs. The women like to sit there and talk between sessions. She hesitated, then nodded. I opened the gate and held it just wide enough for her and her neighbor. We walked up the drive slowly. The live oaks arched overhead. Sunlight filtered through the moss. In the side yard, raised beds waited, filled with basil, rosemary, thyme. A couple of women sat on a bench deep in conversation. When they saw us, they nodded politely and went back to their discussion. This is lovely, my grandmother said, touching a sprig of rosemary. The women take care of it, I said. We wanted a place where they could touch something living that was not a keyboard. She smiled faintly. We walked in silence for a few minutes. I will not keep you, she said finally. I just wanted to say what I said, and to tell you that if I had my life to do over, I would be braver like you. I looked at her, at the lines on her face, at the regret in her eyes, at the humility in her posture. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It is not a switch. It is a series of small choices like stepping stones across a stream. I was not ready to cross all the way, but I could take one step. Thank you for coming, I said. For saying that it matters. Her eyes filled with tears. Take care of yourself, she said. And of these women, they are lucky to have you. So am I whispered more to myself than to her. We walked back to the gate. I did not invite her to stay. She did not ask. But as she left, I felt something in my chest loosen. A knot untied. Not because my childhood had been rewritten, but because one person in my family had finally acknowledged the truth. Inside Harbor House, a woman called my name. Rachel, can you look at this? I think I broke the compiler. I laughed softly. I will be right there, I called. My grandmother smiled. You always were good with problems, she said. Then she stepped back through the gate, leaving me on the Harbor House side, where the future was being written line by imperfect line. On the last night of the inaugural Harbor House residency, the estate glowed like a lantern. String lights we had hung along the back veranda twinkled. The marsh beyond shimmered in the dusk. Inside the house thrummed with quiet energy. We held a small closing ceremony in the main hall. No podium, no grand speeches, just chairs in a circle, a few candles on a low table and a plate of slightly lopsided cupcakes. One of the participants had insisted on baking. The women sat around me, some in sweats, some in dresses they had packed for just in case, all of them carrying something they had not had 3 weeks earlier. Not certainty, not perfection, but something close to permission. We went around the circle, each sharing one thing we were taking with us, and one thing we were leaving behind. I am taking a new understanding of what I am capable of, said the nurse from Brooklyn. I am leaving behind the voice in my head that says I am just anything. I am taking the friendships, said the grandmother from Ohio. I am leaving behind the idea that dreams have expiration dates. I am taking my first pull request, said a quiet woman from Arizona, grinning. And I am leaving behind the shame I have carried for not finishing college 20 years ago. When it was my turn, they all looked at me. I swallowed. I am taking your stories, I said. Not to own them, but to carry them with me. When this work feels heavy, I am leaving behind the last little piece of myself that believed my family's version of who I am. Their faces softened. Someone squeezed my hand. Later, as the house slowly quieted, I stepped out onto the upstairs balcony alone. The night air was warm, thick with the scent of salt and jasmine. Crickets chirped in the distance. Down below, I could see a couple of women sitting on the back steps talking softly under the string lights. I leaned on the railing and looked out at the dark line where the marsh met the river. My phone lay on the railing beside me, screen dark. In my contacts list, my parents' numbers still sat there, uncalled, unanswered, unblocked only because I had not yet decided whether to erase that last trace. I picked up the phone, opened the contact labeled Mom. My thumb hovered over the screen. There is a strange power in the small hidden decisions no one sees. Signing a loan document, submitting a college application, buying a one-way ticket, blocking a number, deleting a contact. I thought about the girl I had been, the one standing in the kitchen while her parents laughed at her, the one who packed a duffel bag in the middle of the night because she could not breathe. The one who believed for a long time that if she just worked harder, loved better, behaved more perfectly, her family might finally see her. Then I thought about the woman I was now, standing on the balcony of an estate turned sanctuary, surrounded by women who had trusted me with their time, their fear, their hope. It was not my job to keep the door cracked open for people who had never knocked. I blocked the contact. The system asked me to confirm. I did. I did the same for my father. For Madeline, 3 pale boxes disappeared from my screen. It did not feel like slamming a door. It felt like locking one that had been rattling in the wind for years, keeping me awake. I set the phone down. The marsh whispered quietly in the dark. Downstairs, the front gate, now fully installed and automated, clicked as it settled for the nightlights along its curves, glowing faintly. Harbor House was secure. So was I. I thought back to that first day at the Charleston Harbor Club, to my sister's laughter, to my parents' jokes, to the way they had measured my worth by my shoes instead of my mind. They had been wrong, not just about me, about themselves. They had believed they could decide permanently who in our family was worthy of investment. They had never imagined I would step out of their script and write my own. Here is what I know now, standing under the Carolina night sky with salt on my tongue and code on my hands. Your worth is not decided in somebody else's living room. It is not determined by who got the bigger bedroom, the shinier trophies, the louder applause. It is not sealed by one person's cruelty or another's indifference. It lives in the choices you make when no one is clapping, in the work you do when no one is watching, in the boundaries you set when everyone expects you to stay quiet. My family's rejection did not define me. It refined me. It pushed me out of a life built on approval into a life built on purpose. Harbor House is not my revenge. It is my recovery. My reclamation, my answer to every woman who has ever sat in a car outside an opportunity and wondered if she was allowed to walk inside. If you are listening to this, maybe you see yourself in some part of my story. Maybe you are the overlooked daughter, the underestimated sister, the employee who does all the work and gets none of the credit. Maybe you have been told you are too old, too young, too loud, too quiet, too much, too little. Hear me clearly. You are allowed to leave any table where love is conditional. You are allowed to build your own table in your own house with your own rules. You are allowed to outgrow the story someone else wrote for you. And when you do, when you finally step into the room that once felt forbidden and plant your flag, you are not just changing your life. You are lighting a path for every woman who comes after you. If my story resonated with you, I want to hear yours. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Tell me the moment you realized you deserved better. Tell me the table you are planning to walk away from, or the one you are building for yourself. Like, share, subscribe if you want more stories like this. Not because I need the numbers, but because somewhere out there, another woman is sitting in her car in the dark, wondering if it is too late. Maybe your share will be the push she needs. Keep going. Your future is wider than their imagination, and you are more powerful than they ever let you believe.